On the night of June 21, 1941, a German corporal named Heinrich Hepe sat in the darkness near the Bug River and wrote a letter to his wife. He told her the food was good. He told her he missed her. He did not tell her that 3 million men were crouched in the forests and marshes around him, waiting for a signal that would come before dawn. He could not tell her that. He barely believed it himself. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The front stretched for 1,800 miles. From the Baltic Sea in the north to the Carpathian Mountains in the south, the largest invasion force ever assembled in human history sat perfectly still in the summer dark. 3 army groups, 700,000 horses, 3,000 tanks, 2,500 aircraft, and silence. The kind of silence that precedes something irreversible. Hitler had conquered Poland in 27 days, France in 46, Norway, Denmark, the Low Countries, Yugoslavia, Greece, all of it inside 2 years. His generals had stopped doubting him. His people had stopped questioning him. Europe lay beneath the German flag from the Atlantic coast to the outskirts of Moscow's time zone. So why wasn't that enough? In Berlin, Hitler had not slept. He paced. He knew something his soldiers crouching in the dark did not yet understand. He believed the Soviet Union was not a real country. He believed it was a fiction, held together by terror and propped up by people he considered racially inferior. One hard strike, he told his generals, and the whole rotten structure would collapse. At 3:15 in the morning, the guns opened. The idea had not come to Hitler in 1941. It had been there since 1925. Written plainly in Mein Kampf for anyone willing to read it. Germany needed Lebensraum, living space, room to expand, to farm, to grow into the great empire that Hitler believed was the German people's destiny. That space existed in the East. It always had. The Soviet Union sat on the largest continuous landmass on Earth, and in Hitler's mind, it was being wasted by people he considered subhuman. He did not see the Soviet state as a legitimate nation. He saw it as a Jewish Bolshevik construction, an artificial thing, rotting from the inside. At his dinner table in the early months of Barbarossa's planning, he told his inner circle that all they needed to do was kick in the door. The whole rotten structure would collapse on its own. General George Thomas heard something different. As head of the Wehrmacht's War Economy Office, Thomas ran the actual numbers in 1940. Soviet industrial output, raw material reserves, manpower depth. He compiled his findings into a formal report and presented it to Hitler directly. The conclusion was unambiguous. Germany could not sustain a prolonged Eastern War. Hitler dismissed him without discussion. He was not ignoring intelligence. He had replaced it with something he trusted more. Himself. The plan had a name, Operation Barbarossa, and it had a timeline, 90 days. German planners believed the Soviet Union would collapse before the first snow fell. 3 army groups would strike in 3 directions simultaneously. Army Group North toward Leningrad. Army Group South toward Kiev and the Ukrainian wheat fields. Army Group Center, commanded by Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, would drive straight for Moscow. Von Bock had private doubts about the timeline. He voiced them once. He was not asked again. In the first 3 weeks, the plan seemed perfect. At Białystok and Minsk alone, German forces encircled and captured 600,000 Soviet soldiers. 600,000. The Red Army appeared to be doing exactly what Hitler had promised. Collapsing. But then the roads appeared on the maps as something they were not in reality. German supply planners had assumed Soviet roads matched the paved highways of France and Belgium. They did not. Many were dirt tracks that turned to thick mud under the weight of German supply trucks. Fuel and ammunition meant for the front piled up miles behind it. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. No Soviet bullet had stopped them. No Soviet tank. Just mud and distance and a country far larger than anyone in Berlin had truly imagined. The first whisper that something was wrong arrived before a single German soldier had seen snow. In October 1941, near the town of Msensk, German tank crews encountered something that stopped them cold. Soviet T-34 tanks rolled out of the tree line, and the shells fired from German Panzer IIIs bounced off their angled armor like stones skipped across water. General Heinz Guderian, one of Germany's most brilliant armored commanders, filed an urgent report to Berlin. The T-34 was superior to anything Germany had in the field. He requested immediate development of a counter. Berlin took months to respond. The tanks were only part of what the Germans had missed. Stalin had already begun moving entire factories east of the Ural Mountains, beyond the reach of German bombers. 1,500 industrial enterprises, dismantled and relocated by rail, were being reassembled in Siberia and Kazakhstan and producing weapons before German intelligence even confirmed they had moved. A German infantryman wrote in his diary in November 1941 that the temperature had dropped to 30 degrees below zero. He had no winter coat. None of them did. The campaign was supposed to be over by October. The hollow enemy Hitler had promised his soldiers simply did not exist. The Red Army kept coming, kept fighting, kept producing. On December 5, 1941, Soviet forces counterattacked outside Moscow. The city did not fall. It never would. The rotten structure had not collapsed. It had been waiting for winter all along. By February 2, 1943, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus stood inside the ruins of a department store in Stalingrad and made a decision that had never been made by a German field marshal in history. He surrendered. Around him, 300,000 German soldiers had been encircled for months. Hitler had forbidden retreat. Paulus had watched his army starve and freeze in the rubble of a city that should never have mattered as much as it did. He signed the surrender document with a hand that would not stop shaking. Stalingrad was not the end. It was the proof of something Albert Speer had already calculated. Germany's armaments minister ran the production numbers in 1943 and presented them to Hitler directly. Combined Soviet and American industrial output had already surpassed anything Germany could manufacture. The gap was not closing. It was widening every month. Hitler told him to find more workers. The mathematics were now irreversible. The Eastern Front had consumed the Wehrmacht the way a fire consumes a house, floor by floor, room by room. Approximately 80% of all German military casualties in the entire war occurred on the Eastern Front. That single number explains everything. When American and British forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, they were able to do so precisely because 3 million German soldiers were already dying in the East. Hitler had guaranteed the two-front war he always said would destroy Germany. He had built it himself with his own hands on the night the guns opened at 3:15 in the morning. So was it the biggest mistake? Yes. But not simply because it failed militarily. It was the biggest mistake because it was built entirely on belief rather than evidence, on ideology rather than reality, and no amount of tactical genius could repair a strategic decision rooted in fantasy. Some historians argue Hitler had no choice, that Soviet rearmament was accelerating and Germany's window for a preemptive strike was closing. The production data does not support it. Soviet industrial capacity in 1941 was formidable but not yet overwhelming. The window Hitler feared had already closed inside his own mind, long before his tanks crossed the Bug River. George Thomas knew. His memo, preserved today in the German Federal Military Archive, predicted with quiet precision exactly what would happen. A prolonged war, resource exhaustion, collapse from within. He wrote it in 1940. Every word came true. Heinrich Hepe, the corporal who wrote to his wife the night before the guns opened, survived the Eastern Front. Took him years to come home. He spent the rest of his life writing about what he had seen, trying to explain something that resisted explanation. 3 million men had crossed that border believing they would be home by Christmas. The ones who came back at all took years. Some never stopped walking. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.